Welcome to Planet Poetry, the podcast for poets and poetry lovers. My name is Peter Kenny.
And I'm Robin Houghton. And in this episode, we're talking with Joe Colley of Blueprint Press and Charles G. Lauder Jr. about his new pamphlet from Blueprint, Year of the Rat.
We'll talk about ekphrastic poetry, and Robin dips into a new pamphlet by Richie McCaffrey, while I look towards the new world for poetic inspiration.
But before all that, let's hear what Joe and Charles had to say to us. Charles G. Lauder Jr. was born and raised in San Antonio, Texas, and has lived in the UK for over 25 years. He is the author of pamphlets Bleeds, from Crystal Clear Creators 2012, and Camouflaged Beasts, Blacklight Engine Room 2017. His debut collection, The Aesthetics of Breath, was published in 2019 by V Press, and his third pamphlet, Year of the Rat, has just been published by Blueprint. Joe Colley is a writer, poet and artist with an interest in the visual representation of text. She lives in Darlington and is one half of Blueprint, an independent poetry press. In 2023, her poetry film, To the Sea, was shortlisted for the Drumshambo Poetry Film Competition. Her latest poetry collection is Sleeper from Smokestack 2020. She's currently experimenting with collage and produces an absurdist zine, Voilà Ici, celebrating all things poetic, European, surreal and nonsensical. In a historic episode of Planet Poetry, I'd like to welcome Joe Colley and Charles Lauder.
Hi there.
Hello.
Good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for having us.
We like to start straight away with saying, where are you in the world? Because we are Planet Poetry after all. So Joe, where are you?
I am in the northeast of England in a town called Darlington, which is about 30 miles south of Newcastle upon Tyne. It's a railway town and it's our 200-year celebration of locomotions.
Excellent. Excellent. I like that. Because York likes to think it's a railway town, doesn't it? But it's not really, not compared to Darlington, is it?
No.
Yeah.
Surprising knowledge about railways, Robin.
Charles, where are you?
I'm in South Leicestershire in a small little hamlet called Upper Bruntingthorpe, which is actually only 60 years old because it's attached to what was formerly RAF Bruntingthorpe that became USAF Bruntingthorpe. So they built this hamlet for the Americans. And then they all left in the early 60s right after the Cuban Missile Crisis. So my wife is from here and her family is here. And
okay. Sounds a bit like Upper Hayford. I used to live in Banbury and Upper Hayford was down the road. That was a US air base. You see, Peter's going to be even more amazed. I know these little things. So we're here to talk about your pamphlet, Year of the Rat, aren't we, Charles? And also, Joe, you're Charles's publisher. So we think this might be a really nice way of talking about publishing generally and also, you know, the experience of being published by a small press and what goes into it. And of course, we're going to start by talking to Charles about your pamphlet. And I'm handing over to Peter, who's got a few questions for you.
Yeah, well, it's lovely to meet you, Charles.
And you too?
Your pamphlet, Year of the Rat by Charles G. Lauder Jr., was that published this year?
Yeah, in February, I think would be the official date.
It's a beautiful little thing with an iridescent cover, but we'll talk more about that later. I want to sort of ask you more about your origins, because I've discovered that you began life in Texas and then moved to the UK some time ago. I wonder, do you think of yourself as a US poet or an English poet, or do you think that's the idea of having a nationality as a poet is just a ridiculous idea?
I always identify as an American poet, as an expat American poet. It's quite interesting. When I first lived in the UK in the late 80s, my flatmate, his father was American, his mother was British, his father was a poet. And he said to me, you're going to get stuck, like my father gets stuck, between two traditions, between English and American. So, and I don't think his father had as much success. And I always thought that was a bit of a curse. But no, I do think of myself as an American poet. And, I know there's been a lot of American poets and quite a few American poets living in the UK right now. So,
yeah, for example, Tamar Yoseloff is originally from New York, but she's become she thinks of herself as being pretty English these days, I think.
Yeah.
Also, a recent interviewee, Erica McAlpine, who's settled in Oxford.
Okay. Yeah, I can think, and I know there's Carrie Etter, and but so yeah, there's quite a few.
When I was reading your pamphlet, I was thinking of Gary Snyder and Jane Hirschfield and others, not as, powerful influences, but that it sort of belonged in a world. And I think what really leaps out is Taoism, and that gives your work a really interesting coherence, I find. Just a top-line thing, Taoism is sort of based on the writings of Lao Tzu, said to emphasize the connectedness of all things. Your poetry seems to be all about noticing the fact that everything is a kind of unity and connections.
Gary Snyder, I read a little bit of in college and such. I've never read Jane Hirschfield, but I will now have to look her up. The kind of ones that I found inspiring, I would say, like kind of spiritually, were Walt Whitman and then Allen Ginsberg, who was inspired a lot by Walt Whitman. And then recently, a friend of mine, as I was writing Year of the Rat, turned me on to Mark Doty, American poet. And he has just come out with a book about Walt Whitman and a memoir about Walt Whitman's impact on his life. So I thought, there we've got a long string here. I did not really actually see the connectedness in my poems about how everything is connected until Joe and Julie pointed it out to me.
Really?
And I thought this pamphlet was all about survival. Yeah. And then they brought in a whole other aspect and layer to it that quite surprised me. And now I can't unsee it.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, that's really nice. Okay, yes.
So Joe, did you see that immediately?
Well, obviously, when you're editing a pamphlet like Charles's, you're going to read the poems a lot of times. But certain poems really leapt out to me. That sense of the minutiae of life set within this huge universe and how you kind of try and find your place in it. So that was partly me thinking, there's a Buddhist interconnection going on here, which I spoke to Charles about, and he explained some things to me, which was really interesting. But also, I love the rat poems. And at the time, I think I was actually dealing with a rat issue in my own backyard. And the whole thing about the world's going on, and here's this creature desperate to survive, just like we are, and that connectedness. So I think it's both. I think, it's not just about survival or just about connectedness. But there is a real coherence to this set of poems, which, as a small press looking for a pamphlet to publish, is very important.
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah. I would like you to read your poem House on Fire. Would you do that?
Sure. House on Fire. Mary had Gabriel. I have ladybirds to deliver my gravid future. 3 times they've landed out of winter blues in search of a patch of green warmth. Next to a mug of Earl Grey in a coffee shop. On my desk. On the carpet during the Great Escape. What's the message? That I could snore for Britain and need to move? Mary ran through town to pray with her cousin, as if praying is doing. Urgent legs hot-footed around and around my thumb as I rotate my hand. Word has spread. I am a station on their fugitive railway. They want to believe there will always be plenty of aphids.
Given that Joe pointed out this the connectedness, what it made me wonder is, in this poem there's this ladybird kind of almost like a messenger from the wider world just landing on you. But it was almost like if everything's connected, it's almost everything's as important as everything else. Almost made me wonder, why did the ladybird get the gig as being the representative?
I don't know. That's a good question. In Taoism, it talks about everything having, everyone having a nature. There's a nature to your being, a purpose. Some would say Taoism can be quite fated. And that when your life moves easily, you're living according to your nature. And when it has upheaval and everything, you're going against your nature. I also looked at it very much like from a kind of a dream perspective, sort of like sometimes look at things if you have odd occurrences, would say like, if this was a dream, what would this be? And the fact that I had 3 different occasions had ladybugs landing on me going, what's that about? What is that about? So that's how the poem evolved. But yeah, I could see them as definitely as messengers. And the few times I've read this poem, it has had some of the most reactions I've ever had from people who will come up to me and tell me of incidents of having a ladybug land on them right before something happened.
Yeah.
So I would think it has a bit of a universal appeal. They are kind of a messenger of sorts.
Yeah.
We put that significance onto them.
Just as a side note, how long has Taoism been in your life and part of your thinking and so on?
About 40 years so.
How did it start?
When I was 21, I worked at a bookshop, and I was dating the bookshop manager, who was a few years older, and she gave me the book, the Tao Te Ching, and I read it, and I thought, yeah, it quite spoke to me. And then it was off and on when my wife and I got married. She was very much into Tai Chi, which is tied into Taoism. And when we lived in Texas for a short time during the 90s, we did Tai Chi from a Taoist Rastafarian from Argentina. It was a great combination. And
everything's connected.
It is. So I would do practice Tai Chi and listen to the Tao Te Ching on audio tape. Mm-hmm. It's gone on more and more. I was born and raised Catholic. And early on, when I was a kid, I just didn't suit me. I didn't connect with it. And the more and more I've gone on through life and read and understood more about Taoism, the greater the connection's been. And it's just grown and grown in that respect.
I'm going to steer us back onto poems now. There's this amazing poem, In Search of Something to Draw. Could you read that for us, please?
Sure. In search of something to draw. The entry wound is above the left shoulder. The exit wound, louder, violent. A last bark leaks sticky and brown from its mouth. A vixen yet to have pups. Its beautiful corpse fished out of the ditch, not for the autumnal pelt or the inkwell black-dipped tail, but to be wrapped in chicken wire and stowed in a field of concrete ruins, bristles, stinging nettles, to cultivate the whiteness of its skull, the sleek tenderness of the femur's neck, condyles, and tubercles. The scavenger spied the find from the school bus, while classmates took shots at her. Camouflaged in khaki coat and winter hat, she treks the mile and a half back to tote it home in a plastic bag. Heavy as a toddler, she says. That's one of several poems that's dedicated to my youngest child, who I didn't realize I had written so much about them. By the time this was put together, it was like about 5 poems. So I thought all about survival and their story of what they're going through fitted very well with, I felt, with the rest of the poems.
It's a beautiful poem, that Heavy as a Toddler. But I love how the remains of this vixen are kind of given a new potential, sort of repurposed. And your daughter in this is almost like a scavenger, and having made her strange find, has decided to bring back the body to draw. There's been an effort, but there's also the sense of that it will be worth it, that somehow bringing this dead body is a really positive act. Do you feel that being a poet is literally scavenging things from the outside world as well? Are you a scavenger, Charles?
Definitely. I think, I tend to write a lot about death. So A scavenger is about death. I think there's many a poet who will go like, oh, that's a good thing. That'll make a good poem. They, kind of steal and pick things from life, or they have a moment in time or an experience with someone, and that becomes a poem, or maybe a secret conversation with someone that becomes something bigger, that turns into something bigger.
Yeah.
So Margaret Atwood wrote, she said this is a fiction, that writing is negotiating with the dead.
I love this poem, and the fact that it's a girl who's doing it.
Yeah.
But also just the details of this body being wrapped in chicken wire and then hidden underneath the nettles and everything. And there was something very kind of Ted Hughes-esque about this way of looking at a dead animal. And also this business of the classmates taking shots at her in a khaki coat. That's a very strange kind of detail in there. I really enjoyed that.
They were doing a GCSE, they were doing art, and they're very methodical about what they do. So they found on YouTube, like, how to clean. I have to back this up, that my youngest is not alone in fascination with skulls. My wife loves the Day of the Dead skulls. I have a skull on my desk. I'm going to pick it up, but it's a plaster Grateful Dead kind of skull. My son has skulls. So my youngest was also very fascinated with skulls, with their artwork. So it was all part of art. So they studied how to figure out how to get a carcass down to bones and everything, so they could draw it for their class. So they're very driven about getting the stuff done. I admire that greatly, and
yeah,
that's why the pamphlet's dedicated to them. So
lovely.
Well, there's another poem which ends the collection, In Search of Silence, which in my mind at least was sort of semi-twinned with that other poem I've just asked you to read. Could you read that for us, please?
Sure, certainly. In Search of Silence. When shouting gunfire and fist shatter the air, I want to lie down in a field and disappear, not with a pistol, nor like the woman dead on her sofa, 3 years unfound, surrounded by unopened Christmas gifts, and wrapped in TV den and downstairs fish and chips, but shrouded in bramble and tall grass, like a chrysalis or fox carcass, their creaking, crying canes, to swallow me within the hedge's tender shadow, layered in ash leaves and badger shit, soaked in runoff, and crabapple split flesh. Here pheasants will build a nest and wait for the world to change.
That's beautiful. Like, at the beginning we've got this kind of gunfire and shouting and fists and so on, this kind of turmoil of horribleness. But you respond to it not wanting to sort of hide, but almost to melt into the natural world. And strangely, again, here we see a carcass becoming home of new life, which I just find really extraordinary. It made me think, do you, in building these poems, are you making sort of little shelters for readers in a way that it feels so kind of like little pockets that each poem to me is almost like a sort of badger's den or something. You can crawl into it and it's just a little world unto itself that seems to be connected with everything else.
I've never thought of them as shelters. I mean, but I do think of that of other people's poems, like I mentioned earlier, like Mark Doty.
Yeah.
His poems I could just, like you say, just crawl into and just love and be just surrounded by just the vibe of it, just the whole immersed in life, beautifulness of where you have death in life, and you can have sometimes very harrowing circumstances, or just in just the beauty of a moment, and so I think that's why I like to gravitate to his. So if somebody sees that in mine, then that's really lovely. That's I've not set out to achieve that, but it's nice to know that people find that.
Do you think that the poems that you're making sort of, they stand outside the normal life and death cycles? They're almost like T.S. Eliot, that sense of standing outside time. With that sort of Taoist background, does that kind of make any sense? Are you trying to create these artworks sort of standing outside the flow of the everyday?
Not intentionally, but I was once, I would say, taught or whatever, said that poems, best poems are encapsulate a moment, and then you explore that moment. And so I like those that were within that moment. And so in that place, yes, time does stand still. So for the poem you talked about earlier, the Tao that can be spoken of is not the eternal Tao. And that is that whole moment of sitting at the dinner table and eating, and it just as the fork is coming up to the mouth, just taking everything in at once.
Yeah.
So in that respect, that one is purposely, let's just slow everything down and everything comes in at a big moment. I edit academic books for a living, and one of the areas is literature, and it's often seen looking at how past authors, how their work lives and dies in cycles and such. And I think that all poetry, everything in life follows, very Taoist, everything in life follows that cycle of life and death and life. So even somebody like Shakespeare went through, after he died, his popularity went down, and then suddenly he relives again. Or somebody like Sir Walter Scott, his work was big for a long time, and then it just died. So I think not everything can live forever.
Yeah.
Could I just say a thing about that poem? I've just
please.
remembered, as you were reading it, Charles, which you did so beautifully, that the character in it of Jocelyn, whose surname I can't remember now, who was found with her Christmas presents unopened, which became a Carol Morley film, was one of the reasons when I was reading, I thought, yes, I want to publish Charles because of that mention. But I think I'd just seen the film and I was like, wow, I felt such a connection to you and to your work in that. And again, that suspended moment for her, which was such a long suspended moment, unfound for all that time sitting in her flat, decomposing like the fox. It's just such an interesting juxtaposition in that poem. So I just wanted to tell you that, which I probably never have.
Thank you. I find that, in such a world of ours where we're all seemingly all connected with our devices and everything, that someone could disappear in the middle of London, I believe that she lived, for 3 years, and no one going up to the flat, no one ever discovering her. Part of the poem was inspired by reading a Guardian article when they found her. And also at the time, a lot of these poems were written after COVID, during COVID, and with the world being in such chaos as it continues to be, it was, please, I would just like to, a little bit of peace and quiet.
I think that's a pretty good segue, because the first question I was going to ask you, Joe, was what kind of thing was it that drew you to Charles's pamphlet when he submitted it to you at Blueprint Press?
Thank you. Well, it's very interesting because we have rules in Blueprint about how we don't look at unsolicited submissions. We're the ones who approach the poet, but then rules are made to be broken, right? And we met Charles at Free Verse, not this year, but last year.
Yeah.
And he's obviously a very interesting person to talk to. And we talked generally about poetry and about what he was doing. And he asked if he could submit some work to us. So we were like, yeah. And we thought, well, if we like it, great. If we don't, nothing is lost. So we felt quite daring, actually, being so open to his work. And then it came. I think I read it first. And I was like, yeah, there's definitely something here. There's all the qualities of the spirituality, the connectedness. But also I thought, here's a man who is writing beautifully about domestic life, about family life. Family with rats, but nevertheless, there was a warmth, there was an interestedness in the day-to-day, which I really admired. So I didn't say anything to Julie. I just said, just have a read. And she just said, oh, yeah, we need to publish this. So that's how that happened.
So Julie Hogg, she's your co-editor at Blueprint.
She is, yes.
And you say you have rules. So what are the rules? I mean, do you have submissions windows? And also, you've got a very interesting USP, haven't you, about the fact that you publish pamphlets by poets between full collections?
That's right. Yes. Well, I think when we first started talking about this, which was in 2019, Julie and I, we weren't thinking about doing this at all. I think I was putting together my full collection with Smokestack, which came out in 2020. And I was thinking, oh gosh, some of these poems are really old. It's 5 years since I've been published. do I even feel a connectedness to these poems? And it was kind of interesting. I was chatting to Julie about this. I'm sort of thinking, well, it would have been good if some of these poems had come out 2 or 3 years ago, and then another. I mean, I've known Julie a long time. We both live on Teesside, and we've had lots of poetry collections in the past, and we speak about poetry a lot together. And I said, well, let's just look at pamphlets for a bit. So we both gathered together from our bookshelves all the pamphlets that we had, which was a larger number, dating back over many years. And we looked at them and just thought, well, these are really beautiful. And could we do this? So it sort of began there. And we thought, well, what we'd like to do is talk to poets who are, maybe in that 5-year hiatus between their full collections, and say to them, is there something here? Is there a set of poems that you've got that you'd like to put out now instead of waiting all that time? Are they maybe not quite fitting in what you're doing now? Are they somewhat to the side of what you're doing? Or, they could be included in your next collection, but nevertheless they could be like a forerunner to your full collection. So we thought this might work as an idea. So that's how we were pitching it. People who are already published, they'd done maybe 2 or 3 collections, they were waiting for the next one. Did they have something in the meantime that they would like to bring out? And then we just started approaching people we liked. I mean, it was as simple as that. And it felt quite cheeky, really, that you just email a poet and say, oh, hi, have you got any poems you'd like to put in a little pamphlet by us, a completely unknown new press?
I'm sure you got plenty of takers, didn't you?
We did. And, obviously I've been around the poetry scene and I've had a lot of contacts, which I think helps. And they're so generous. I think poets are a very generous bunch. And poets usually have a set of poems that they would like to bring into the daylight.
Yeah.
So we have published pamphlets that have later gone into full collections. And then we've just published sets of work like by Matthew Colley, which just stand alone as, one of his works. Yes. And so it can go in different directions. So that was the rule, and that's how it went for ages. And then we had a submissions window. We thought, okay, we're being a bit, closed shop here. Let's open a submissions window. So we did that, I think, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And we got 75 pamphlets sent to us.
Gosh, that's a lot of reading to get through.
That was a lot of reading. And also, you feel so responsible when that happens. Like, thank goodness there are 2 of us. I'd hate to do that on my own. So we went through various shortlists because all of them were competent, well thought out. But you're looking for that extra something, aren't you, if you're going to publish? Yeah. But there are a lot of good people writing, and it's really hard to find what felt right. So in the end, we published Tim Cummings, who had already been published, and Claire Collison, who, for her, it was her first pamphlet.
Ah.
So that was another rule broken. But we are so glad that we published both of them.
Yeah.
And they've both been top sellers.
Really? Now, top sellers, this is interesting. So is this a business, or is this a labour of love, or is it somewhere in between?
I used to have an accountant when I was doing more work, and she said, Jo, this is a hobby. This is not a business. And I was thinking, well, what do you mean? So you're not actually making any real money from this. Well, and I'm thinking, yes, that's true. We aim to break even. Yeah. Julie and I. And we almost do. And when we don't, it's because we've done something like had an event in London where we've both had to travel to and from London. We've rented a room somewhere in London, which is, astronomical.
Yeah.
But we do like to do live events. So we mainly do a Zoom event when a new pamphlet comes out. But then at some point over the next year or so, we like to do a live event. We like them. We enjoy them. We like meeting our poets.
Yeah.
And our readers. And so that takes up all the money. We've got a fantastic printer who lives in Middlesbrough. He's just turned 70, so we're not allowing him to retire. He'd never published poetry before, so we had to go and talk to him. He helped us choose paper. He helped us choose our iridescent cover. He really loves printing our pamphlets now. So, that relationship is very important. He's not massively expensive.
I think almost breaking even is pretty good, actually. You're probably doing better than some of the larger poetry presses.
Well, we're very, we can print to order, which is really good. So, you don't have that horrible situation where you have boxes of pamphlets under your bed. Yeah, certainly publishing's become more, the price of entry has gone down considerably, hasn't it, because of that? Definitely.
But there's still an awful lot of love involved, isn't there?
Oh gosh, yes.
Let's face it. Like you say, you love doing the events, and interesting what you said earlier about you're known and you've got a lot of goodwill behind you, and I think that's a huge factor, isn't it? We're interested to know, how do you see other small presses? I mean, is there a sense of rivalry, or is it camaraderie? We're all doing this together. Do you support one another in some way? How does that work?
That's an interesting question. And I think that, generally speaking, it's a very collaborative, friendly atmosphere when you're at somewhere like Free Verse. I mean, I think sometimes Julie and I feel, because we live up in the northeast, we're slightly out on a geographical limb where nobody's heard of, Redcar or Darlington. Really?
But, Newcastle's a bit of a little hub, isn't it, of stuff?
Newcastle is, although, when you're on Teesside, this is where the rivalry kicks in, actually. Teesside is not Newcastle.
It's not. I didn't mean to imply that. That's really rude of me. But the Northeast generally.
Yes, I mean, it's got a brilliant poetry scene, certainly, and there's lots of great events. But in terms of, I did used to put on events in Durham and in Darlington, and, I do try to kind of drum up a sense that there is a warm and welcoming atmosphere around poetry where we're all in it together. And there is definitely some of that. And there are, Smokestack, for example, which Andy Croft used to run, not in Darlington, but definitely in the north. And we've done events with Smokestack. But, since Free Verse, I would say, we've got to know a lot more small presses and definitely spoken to them about how things are. It's hard to be generous when we're all so poor, aren't we? There's nobody there who could say, all right, well, we can bail you out because we've got all this money. We have never tried putting in a funding application, but we have talked about doing that.
Talking is fine. We've done some and they've never worked. So maybe that's good. Stop at the talking about it.
I just can't bear filling out forms. I'd rather give people money than fill out a form.
It is, there are a lot of hoops to jump through. I used to run an event in Darlington called Hydrogen Jukebox, and we were funded by the Arts Council. And there was always a time of the year when me and my collaborator would go mad filling in forms and fall out badly and try and find receipts. And, So it's another world, isn't it? And then you kind of can feel a bit beholden and a bit less free, I think, when you have a funder. At the moment we can go, that's great that Charles has got in touch. He's sent us these beautiful poems. We can just publish him. And it seems kind of mad that you can do that still to me. That you can do that. It's wonderful, isn't it?
It is.
I've tried applying for ACE grants a few times, and the paperwork, and then you have to say how many expected audience members and sales, and I stopped. There's just no way. I admire those people who get it, but there's just no way I was like, how do you predict to be very arrogant enough to go, I'm going to get thousands of people to buy my pamphlet and come see me read?
Yeah.
I think it's knowing the right words to put in the application, isn't it? And I think there are people who are very successful and they know the winning phrases that you need to put in that are going to work. And you sort of lose the will to live after a while, don't you? I think, trying for that kind of thing. But Jo, you mentioned Smokestack. I just wanted to ask you, because you're published by them. So you have a career as a poet. So how does that sit with putting all this time and effort into the press?
Yes, so that is interesting. It depends on, like I do try to write as often as possible. But when I'm involved very deeply in somebody else's work, when you're at the proof stage or the second or third proof stage and that person's voice is in your head, it is quite difficult to drop that. But, I keep writing. Smokestack is now folded, which is desperately sad. And so have lots of other presses, haven't they? So
and magazines.
So it's a much tougher time, I think. But I am now sending off my own work. So
good. Congratulations.
That's interesting to be in that position and, getting ready for all the rejections. Because it's got to be done, hasn't it?
So, Jo, where do you get your resilience from in terms of just keeping going? Is it in your relationship with your partner in crime?
I tell you, Julie is absolutely brilliant, and I would not be doing this without her. She's a very sensible head. Yeah. She worked for Barclays Bank for a long time, but she is also the most fantastic poet. So I admire her work very much, and I love her as a partner in this venture. She is brilliant, and we keep each other going. Yes, that is very important. But I also, honestly, I do still think this is an amazing privilege to ask poets for their work. I mean, it takes a lot of work to produce a collection of poems, doesn't it? And these are brilliant poets, and they trust their work to us, and that is an amazing thing. So, yes, sometimes we're headbanging, but mostly we're pretty happy with what we do.
That's a really nice way of putting it. Yes, it's a privilege, but actually you're doing them a massive favour as well.
You like to think so. You like to bring out, and so we are quite hands-on editors as well.
Right.
So we will have discussions with the poet about, and sometimes we have to reduce the number of poems that have been sent. So then there's a discussion about which ones will go. Sometimes there's talk about where they will go in the pamphlet. It's amazing how poets seem to enjoy that discussion and attention to their work. And the poet always has the last word. If they want it that way, it's their work. But generally speaking, poets like to discuss such things and see us as their first readers. And that's great. Yeah. I love that. I love editing.
Well, poets love a bit of attention. And...
a lot of attention.
Well, yeah, just so attention-seeking. But to have two people that are obviously immersed in poetry, really focused on work you've done, is an absolute privilege.
So, Charles, are you contemplating another full collection, or what are you working on now? Anything in the pipeline?
So, as Jo was talking about how the poets she and Julie have published have, something in between. Year of the Rat came out apart from a second collection I've been working on. I had my first one in 2019, and over the past 5 years, I've been working on the theme of masculinity, toxic male role models, all that such. And then this little bundle came out, was just, they wouldn't fit in. So I have the second collection all, I think, feel pretty much done. I've sent it to a couple places, like your alma mater, Pen Drop.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just slowly starting to knock on doors with that collection.
Okay.
Can I just add a tidbit on when I was assistant editing Interpreter's House with Martin Malone?
Oh, that's right. That's when I first met you, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah. So I did that 2014 to 2018. And one of the joys that I found was telling people that we were going to publish their poems. Yeah. Because I knew that joy. And it was lovely to be able to give that to people. To sort of, I always think of it like pulling people up. So like when you're editing or when I've done work with scouting, you're pulling people up. So it's just like, here you go, letting their voices be heard. And that was always one of the biggest things I enjoyed. And all of what Jo said about working with them, I completely agree with. She and Julie are just complete brilliant people and do a wonderful job.
Oh, thank you.
How lovely to hear.
I feel warm now. Thanks so much for coming on Planet Poetry. Charles G. Lauder Jr., whose pamphlet Year of the Rat published by Blueprint Press.
And from Blueprint Press, thank you, Joe Colley, for coming on and chatting with us. It's been really interesting and insightful, and lovely to have both you and one of your poets, Charles, on here at the same time, I think.
Two sides of the coin. It's lovely, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was lovely to be here.
So that was great idea, wasn't it, to talk to Joe and Charles, or a poet and publisher, to see that kind of partnership. Joe and Julie seem to be a great editorial combination, backing each other up, enthusiastic and so carefully reading Charles's work.
Yes.
I think we don't often sing the praises of editors enough, really, on this programme. I mean, they're sort of stealthily working behind the scenes, tweaking and improving.
Yes. Small poetry presses, they do vary, don't they, in terms of editorial intervention or help, I suppose, don't they? So I think some presses, you submit your pamphlet or your book and it kind of has to be pretty much finished.
Yeah.
Whereas others, the editors are very hands-on, aren't they, in one way or another?
This needs an intervention, yeah.
So it does depend on the press and on the setup. But yeah, no, it was fantastic what Joe had to say about Charles's work. It's great to have a champion on your side like that.
Yeah, what an interesting poet. I love the way his sort of philosophy, personal philosophy, that Taoism that just permeated everything he wrote. And yet it creates a lovely flavour without, you're not being persuaded of anything. You just suddenly see the world in a slightly different, very connected and very noticing way. And I think that pays dividends in the way he writes. I just really liked his poetry, and a lovely bloke.
And I think we should say, there obviously we only had time for him to read 3 poems, and there's a huge amount of variety in the pamphlet, so very interesting and entertaining read.
Yeah.
It was unusual, us both being in on that. We've done that once before, haven't we, with Di George, where both of us interviewed him.
Yes, on how to think like a poet.
It wasn't that long ago, was it? Earlier this season.
Yeah.
But I think other than that, in all of our 5 seasons, I don't think we've done a joint interview, certainly not with 2 interviewees. So it was quite exciting, wasn't it?
It was.
We've done so many collaborations together, and we've done readings together, haven't we? And in fact, recently we were in London reading with our old Telltale press pal, Sarah Barnsley, weren't we?
In an event run by Irena Hill. And it was really nice, actually. Nice library there.
Yeah, the series is called Inwards, and I've read there once before, a while back. But it was so well organised, wasn't it? And there was refreshments, and I think Irena had thought of everything, really.
Yeah. One of the things I really enjoyed about it was that, and this came from Irena, was the idea of projecting the words of the poem onto a screen. But that, of course, gave us the opportunity to also project images and so on. So because of that, I read a couple of poems that were ekphrastic in origin and was able to project the images, onto a screen. And that somehow gave them a lot more context and made it all much easier to understand. So it was kind of, it was like one of those old school audio-visual presentations,
Show and tell. Or the acetates, a big pile, and you just sort of put them on the projector.
Yeah, one of the things I was showing was a daguerreotype, and it's like, look, there's a little man in there. You were doing a bit of ekphrasis on Friday, weren't you? Last Friday.
Yes.
In sunny Eastbourne.
Yes, we have a fantastic contemporary art gallery in Eastbourne, the Towner.
Yeah, it's marvellous, isn't it?
It's marvellous. And the current exhibition there is called Sussex Modernism, and it's a massive kind of eclectic show. I really like the variety of the work they've got on show there. They've got some classic modernist artists, and they've got some magic realism, some surrealism. There's even and you'll like this, listeners, there's even the first issue of Blast magazine from 1914.
The Vorticists.
the vortices, they've got it on display in a glass cabinet open at the start of the manifesto. Blast England, and a whole kind of list of people and things that get blasted. It's hilarious, really. And I did a bit of digging about the artists and writers and poets involved in that and the things that they were blasting against. And so one of my poems was based on, I should say, the reason I was there was because there were a group of us from local poetry group that had written some poems in response to this exhibition. So yes, ekphrastic or almost ekphrastic.
Mm.
I wrote a poem in response to this massive painting by Ivan Hitchens, which lives normally in the University of Sussex in Mandela Hall, which was the dining room in the 1960s when the university was founded. But when I was there, in my day, as a student, it was just called Mandela Hall, and we did, we had meetings in there, aerobics classes, and there was this painting on the wall the whole time. And did I really take much notice of it? No. But in this exhibition, it looks massive, and it's so striking. So I was very much inspired by that.
It's interesting, isn't it, that, visual art, like in murals and things that we walk past on the street sometimes, occasionally they can be marvellous and you almost consciously have to stop and look at them.
Yeah,
But while you're leaping around doing your aerobics and there's a masterwork on the wall.
Little did I know, years later I'd be extolling its virtues at the Towner. And yeah. So that was a really fun thing.
Mm. Well, I've had a sort of long love-hate relationship with ekphrastic poetry. I think I said recently that ekphrastic poetry can give me the ick. And sometimes it's just that unimaginative response where the poem is just kind of explaining what's in the painting. And I can just look at the painting for that. I was reading a poem by Adam Zagajewski. It was called Still Life. And apparently it was inspired by looking at Rembrandt, although Rembrandt and painting doesn't come into it at all. But it's a kind of very melancholy, kind of rich self-description. It's more interesting to me when the kind of spirit of the artwork enters rather than the description of what's in it. You've been affected by the work of art, and then what does that then spark in you?
Yes, I think that's right. And I mean, there's so much that an abstract painting, for example, has in common with contemporary poetry. I mean, a friend of mine who came to this reading, she said afterwards, I just couldn't see anything in that painting. It just looked like a mass of shapes and colours. I couldn't really connect with it. And I'd like to go back there with you and you tell me more about what you see in it. And I thought, well, that's great. But what I see in it is not what someone else sees in it.
Yeah, I really like art that appeals only to your visual sense, that creates an ineffable feeling rather than something you can just decode straight away and explain to somebody. I do like the challenge of that sort of abstract, that sometimes abstracts can affect you really strongly without being able to explain why.
Yeah, I agree.
Just mansplained abstract art.
I quite liked that explanation though.
In all this flurry of readings and activity and book launchy stuff you've had, have you had a chance of reading anything? Because sometimes that can really get in the way, can't it?
Funnily enough, yes. A pamphlet landed through my door not so long ago. A new pamphlet from Richie McCaffrey.
Ooh, yeah.
His is a name that I've seen around the place. I sort of, been on my radar, but I didn't know his work at all. And this pamphlet, which is published by New Walk Editions, it's called, I probably pronounce this wrongly, it's called Scale. It might be Skyle or Skeel, I'm not sure. Skail. And we're told on the back that scale is an old Scots word meaning a scattering or dispersal. And it says the poems in this pamphlet take place in the aftermath of a pandemic and in the dissolution of a long-term relationship. With scale comes loss and confusion, but also the possibility of renewal. So that's a little blurb from the back. And these are short, really beautifully crafted poems. It's just one of those books that I started at the beginning and I just kept going. And every time the next poem, I'd think, oh, wow, oh, wow. So, that sort of, I wish I'd written that kind of thing. So,
yeah.
I've got a feeling he might have been in a bit of a hiatus. He's had 2 full collections with 9 Arches. I think they were both pre-pandemic, and this might be the first pamphlet since then. Shall I read a couple of little short ones from it?
Yeah, that would be fabulous.
I mean, I was going to read just one, but they're short and I couldn't decide. This one's called Grandmother. She must be fed words every evening on the phone. And, like her food, they must be bland and soft. Always the radio on, leaking classical music, or the TV blaring in its corner like a crier. She has built a fortified wall of sound around her, but the silence is looking for a way in, and is deafening.
Wow, that's great. The language is really quite simple, but I love this idea of having to be fed words that are kind of bland and reassuring.
Yeah, and the TV, like a crier.
And that kind of ghastly silence waiting in the wings.
Looking for a way in. Yeah, the silence is looking for a way in. It's quite menacing, isn't it?
Yeah, trying the doors and things. But I love that kind of condensation of something, of that feeling into something that seems so simple and so condensed and yet easy to read and understand.
Yeah, yeah.
So, really good, isn't it?
This one it's called Him and Her. The 2 long stone breakwaters curl around the harbour and its rival towns like arms stuck rigid in sculpture. Both stretch into pewtery blue, and from a distance it looks to you like they're straining to meet. But it's just curvature's connivance. Though they both shared the same quarry once, they've agreed to stick to their parishes, letting the rest of the world pass between them.
Gosh.
That's an original way of talking about a relationship, isn't it? And so visual, these...
Yeah.
You know exactly what he means about those kind of curved walls, sort of reaching out to sea. I love the idea that they shared the same quarry once. It's quite poignant, isn't it?
And the kind of almost yearning towards each other, but they're stone and unmoving and kind of will never meet.
Yeah.
And the whole world passing between them. Quite sad, but again, really deftly
Clever.
and simply done, but lovely, yeah.
Yeah, so lovely stuff. So much.
That's really good.
Recommended. Scale by Richie McCaffrey. How about you, Peter? Are you inspired by anything you've read recently?
Well, yeah. I seem to be kind of contradicting myself a lot lately, so I've been since our little Greenwich expedition, I've been reading ekphrastic poetry.
Can I just stop you there? How did you pronounce the name of that place?
Oh, you've instructed me. It's Greenwich.
I would just like to say, having grown up in the then London borough of Greenwich, it is Greenwich, people. None of this Greenwich stuff. I'm not sure where that came from.
Well, that's because I'm so posh.
I expect there'll be people raging now, saying, hang on a minute, it's definitely Greenwich.
Well, thanks to Irena, I've started thinking again about ekphrastic poetry, and I was looking for recommendations. I found myself quite liking a poem by Frank O'Hara.
Frank O'Hara, is that you liked? I love the sound of you eating your words, Peter. It's sort of deafening, isn't it?
Have you ever had a friend that when you first met them, you didn't like them at all?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Like one of my oldest friends, Mark Hartley, when I sat next to him at school, age 11, he wouldn't lend me his eraser. And I just thought, this bloke, and we still go for beers now. In my last birthday, he gave me a little present that was a little strange thing wrapped up, and I opened it, and it was a W.H. Smith's rubber. Yeah, so
Oh, lovely. A little love token. I like that.
Anyway, so I'm really trying with Frank O'Hara, but this one I quite liked. Why I am not a painter. I am not a painter, I am a poet. Why? I think I would rather be a painter, but I am not. Well, for instance, Mike Goldberg is starting a painting. I drop in. Sit down and have a drink, he says. I drink, we drink. I look up. You have sardines in it. Yes, it needed something there. Oh. I go, and the days go by, and I drop in again. The painting is going on, and I go, and the days go by. I drop in. The painting is finished. Where's sardines? All that's left is just letters. It was too much, Mike says. But me, one day I am thinking of a colour, orange. I write a line about orange. Pretty soon it is a whole page of words, not lines. Then another page. There should be so much more, not of orange, of words, of how terrible orange is and life. Days go by. It is even in prose. I am a real poet. My poem is finished, and I haven't mentioned orange yet. It's 12 poems. I call it Oranges. And one day in a gallery I see Mike's painting called Sardines.
Very good.
Reluctantly quite liking that. The idea of a poem all about oranges without oranges in it. Kind of,
and the sardines, the ghost of the sardines is still there. I mean, I can understand that. The original thing that it was going to be about has just been overpainted and kind of gone.
Yeah. So that was the sound of me quite enjoying a poem by Frank O'Hara.
Excellent.
This thing about dropping in on his mate Mike Goldberg, who happens to be a wonderful painter, and just sitting around.
Well, is it the lifestyle you object to, or the writing?
I just can't explain it. Well, it's obviously a failure in me, because so many people I know absolutely adore Frank O'Hara. John Ashbery and all those guys.
Sometimes I find hearing the poet reading the work themselves sometimes helps me getting it in.
I'm sure he would have delivered a lot better than I did. My stuffy English accent.
Well, I'm just saying.
Anyway, I did try. I'm really trying. I used to say this thing about I like to take an instant dislike because it saves time.
Yeah, I remember you saying that.
But maybe it doesn't save time in the end, because if you take an instant dislike and then you have to unpick it gradually over the decades. Anyway, me and Frank O'Hara.